Looking to improve your web application security? Probly is reinventing web application security. Probly focuses on the vulnerabilities that matter, eliminates false positives with evidence-based scanning, and provides a simple point-and-shoot solution that is easy to use. Probly's thorough coverage ensures accurate identification of vulnerabilities in any modern web application or API. Improve your web application security processes by visiting securityweekly.com/Probly and start your free trial today. We discuss application security a lot on this show, and we know that the implications for code security have become even greater as cloud adoption accelerates software development. Shift Left bridges the gap between security teams and developers to find and fix vulnerabilities accurately from the source. Shift Left Core is an innovation in code security with industry-leading accuracy and speed. It combines next-generation static code analysis, intelligent software composition analysis, secrets detection, security insights, and contextual developer security education in one easy-to-use platform. Learn more and create your free account at securityweekly.com/shiftleft. Software supply chain attacks are continuing to expose vulnerabilities in organizations around the world. The time has come to focus your efforts on security for your software packages. Cloudsmith is the only cloud-native software package management solution for your enterprise. With Cloudsmith Continuous Packaging, you can securely deliver software across the globe and mitigate potential threats from entering your supply chain. With over 23+ formats supported, Cloudsmith is the solution that engineers choose to safely deliver all of their assets. Reduce unneeded downtime and deliver with confidence. Start securing your software supply chain today by visiting securityweekly.com/Cloudsmith.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. I'm your host, Mike Shima, joined by John Kinsella. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. We'll have keynotes from Alyssa Miller, John Strand, Leslie Carhart, and Dave Kennedy. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to register and check out more of our exciting lineup. You can also join us in our next live webcast on October 21st to learn why zero-knowledge encryption matters. Then join us on November 4th to learn about pragmatic steps to reduce your software supply chain risk. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to save yourself a seat. And don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. John, it's the news time, and I know that we tend to go back to the 80s and 90s from some of the music and movies references that I make here, but I'm trying to pull out the good stuff from that eras and leave the bad stuff behind. But we've got an article here that's kind of about all the bad stuff of 90s era responses to vulnerability disclosure. And not a good look. So maybe you want to start us off with this story coming out of good old, Missouri?
Yeah. I posted this on a Discord last week because it's sort of the funny haha, but at the same time it's wincingly painful because this is actually happening with a governor of a state of the United States in 2021. So the backstory here, which I think actually got blown over a little bit, and I'm going to forget the name of the paper, so apologies to those folks. But actually, no, it's mentioned here in the story that you grabbed. St. Louis Post-Dispatch. It's not clear yet on my radar how they got into the situation, probably from an educator, but someone informed, or somehow the reporter realized that you can view source on a web page for the middle schools. There's like a list of teachers out there. And you could actually, it wasn't displayed on the rendered page, in the source code was the teacher's social security numbers. This show, we know technical phrase, this is considered bad. They did a responsible thing. They disclosed it to the school, not school district, but the education department. Did everything, proper by the board. They didn't go and publish it or try to exploit or anything like that. They found it. They told them. They took down the page. And then something interesting happened. This actually didn't start with the governors. That's what people are saying, but it started with that, with the Department of, I believe it's Middle and speak much. With the department that's actually doing elementary and secondary education. There's the phrase I'm looking for. They decided that reporter is a hacker, and we're going to try to prosecute them. So we'll see how far this goes. Where it got in everyone's radar is the person who is the governor of that state. Many are referring to as the type of person you find running around in a tent, say at Ringling Brothers. But they started really sort of banging the drum that hacker tried to break into our systems. They did something highly complex and they viewed the source code and they decrypted it or whatever else. And
right.
It's bad. And I'm dancing around it, but let's be honest, they sound like a clown. And to have this happen, and it's not so much that person, right? It's a politician. None of us expect politicians to be highly technical it doesn't be a politician, right? Unless you're, in our neck of the world, our little bubble, I don't expect you to be highly technical and understand how you go about finding this. Or, Sam was saying, well, how did this even happen? Our director of, damn it, I'm going to screw up her title again, and I know she's always listening when I do it. Our executive producer, got it right this time. But she's like, how did this get in there, right? And we know, because usually what happens with these softwares is someone says, okay, you need an API to be able to grab this data and display it in a page. And the developer went select star from educator's table where educator ID equals whatever the ID is. And, we're going to send them back everything, but we know they're going to display the fields of which they want. But instead of actually saying select first name, last name, email address, phone number, and just pull out the fields which you want, which is what you should be doing, they said select star. So next thing you know, you've got this object of that educator is in the source code. And next thing you know, someone goes poking around, becomes a big deal, and then you're a governor of a state, and you end up looking sort of silly because you're trying to claim this as a hacker. So where I was going there with that is, it's not so much, I don't expect him to know that, but I expect the people who are around him to go, no, don't get up on that podium in front of a news team and say that this person we're going to go full lengths to prosecute. I expect the people around him are in that that group whose name I keep forgetting, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. I expect them not to be acting like clowns. Are there developers or their IT people or somewhere along that line going, hey, I'm going to stick my head up and go, you really don't want to go out and do this in public. Not alone, I guess the governor actually doubled down when we all started making fun of him on Twitter and came back and said, no, this is actually really a big deal. And we're like, no, it's not. But anyways, that's, we're talking about a lot. I don't want to focus on the governor. I don't want to focus on this particular thing. The question, again, looking at this from an educational point of view is how do we get in this situation? What happened? How do we get here? How do we deal with it correctly? And then, for bonus points, how do we help communicate, again, outside our bubble so that our boss's boss doesn't end up looking stupid in front of a podium, even though he thinks he's doing the right thing. So that's sort of the takeaway for me. How do we address those type of things here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's absolutely some well-placed, well-deserved ridicule here. But the underlying message, I think, is we can spend all of our time on the ridicule, but if we forget those aspects of here's a journalist, as you described, going through actually all the good parts of both coordinated and responsible vulnerability disclosure before publishing this article, and then advisors up the chain or throughout the chain misrepresenting or misstating or not communicating very well what exactly the nature of the flaw was. So it's sort of that type of thing that started off with an embarrassment from this state entity running their web application, pulling, as you said, sort of that equivalent of a select star rather than just names, perhaps, presenting only what they thought was the sensitive data, forgetting that view source is actually a pretty legit way of looking behind the scenes and figuring out that what a better track could have been. Here's where I'm stumbling over my communication skills, is just saying here is rather than doubling down on embarrassment of, oops, we had a really bad, very simply exploitable flaw. This wasn't even something that was difficult, that were, the difficult type of exploit that we're going to talk about a little bit later. This was pretty simple, and which means it can amplify the embarrassment, but the reaction should be that more aspect of transparency, a postmortem, here's what we did, here is how we fixed the process, rather than start driving buses and finding people that we could drive over, especially if those buses are backed by legal action, which is what we don't want to see. That's another reason, still on this aspect of can we educate, what can we bring out of these types of stories that I think are messages we can take to our own organizations, help our CEOs do something besides more than just, we take your security seriously. And in response to breaches, there was another one that was also on my radar because it was a wonderful use of Rickroll about a student finds a 0-day in some IPTV. devices. Now, what's pretty interesting here is that I linked into the student's own write-up about this in this story, and it does actually straddle a bit of the gray areas in terms of, call it responsible, or I tend to prefer coordinated vulnerability disclosure. But here's someone who sat on a flaw for not just a few weeks or months, but a year or two, but did actually generate a report, was relatively transparent after they'd done the fun prank with rickrolling all of their internet-connected TVs at their school. And rather than being fully embarrassed, the administrators said, this was a good report. Thank you for actually, going through the effort of documenting what the flaws were, helping us understand, and getting us to the point where we can actually fix it. There's perhaps a bit of finger waving about the time that they took, and exactly, they might have gone a bit far, but at least they did it with a good sense of humor. But also too, a really good case of sort of the more positive aspect that we should have seen from the Missouri case that we were just talking about.
Yeah, and this is what's sort of fun about this one is, and I haven't been asked this for a while, but frequently I'll usually get asked by people who are sort of on the edge when they're dealing with a vulnerability response one way or another. You'll get that question of like, who actually finds these things, or who are these people out there who are attacking me right now, right? And for ages we've said punk ass kids, and partially jokingly, but partially, unless you're in a unless you've got a lot, you have to have time to do this type of stuff, right? So either go be a punk ass kid in college or high school that you don't want to do your homework, so you go and do this on a weekend or over summer, or you're going to be funded by one of the customers, but one of the vendors could be one of our sponsors, or it's going to be something like a government entity, or else you're just a hobbyist and you've got that free time. These things take time to build up the skill sets, and also to find, once you have that skill set, to do something with it, unless you get lucky and trip over something. And I think this is somewhere in between. But yeah, right. It's again, why does the punk ass kid do it? Either because he wants to, he's learning and he's curious, he wants to have fun, or he wants to, be able to make fun of the teacher, or get something in there like a rickroll and sort of show off to his kids, or hopefully get the hot girl for our guy for the high school dance. I'm reaching here, but you get where I'm going, right? And so that's where it's interesting from that point of view, in that it's something that's relatively innocent, but at the same time, this is sort of, you get a taste for the drug, and this is sort of becomes a lot of fun for a lot of us. So luckily, I think the biggest thing here is, look at the difference in response between the last story and this story. And let's go back to the last story for a second, actually, because we talked about how does that SSN get in there, but I don't think we talked about how did this really get escalated up through the ranks as this is a hacker. So in this case, the administration is like, okay, it's sort of white hattish. It's funny, haha, we're going to be the cool principal. So he got lucky here versus the other case. But what probably happened in the other case is someone went to the developer and said, dude, why is this social security number on this page? And the guy's response, instead of fessing up and saying, guy or girl, again, whatever, instead of that person fessing up and saying, I made a mistake, or wow, I could have done that better, or something like this, or it was late, or any of the reasons, good or bad, they said, no, that code is legit. The only way you could actually find that is if you're a hacker. I'm guessing some story like this. And then maybe the manager didn't know that well, so we went to his manager and said, we had a meeting about this, we talked about it. As far as we're concerned, this could only be done if someone was a hacker with some really great skills to be able to get that SSN. And then that goes up. As that goes up further and further in bureaucracy, there's less and less actual technical diligence against that statement. And next thing you know, you've got this dude at a podium, and the original coder is probably going, oh shit, the governor's talking about something which I did, and he's definitely not going to raise his hand now, right? So it comes back to not just having that coordinated disclosure or responsible disclosure on the discoverer's part, the researcher's part, to use that phrase, but also, we talk about occasionally on here having that no blame review of what's going on, either after a sprint or after whatever else. It's like that concept of not blaming somebody is probably what would have allowed this not to have blown up the way it is on that one. But these are both really good examples of what happens, the yin and yang, I think, of how these things can be, responded to once something like this is discovered. I mean, he didn't even go and as he said himself in the last paragraph, Min didn't go to the teachers and say, hey, I found this thing. We need a patch, but can I have fun with this one time? And that's sort of what the reporter did, but still, here we are.
Here we are. And I just want to emphasize that point you're making too about what is when we talk about DevOps or DevSecOps, blah, 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 et cetera. But I think what we're really getting to when we say that as an easy catchphrase is what is the culture of the organization you're building? Mm-hmm. And the culture isn't just about we have an OWASP top 10 checklist. This is the tech stack we use. We like Rust, we like Go, we like JavaScript, blah, 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 all those technical aspects. It's about the communication and the culture you're establishing on how do people get blamed? Do people get blamed? How do we respond? How do we communicate and explain the types of issues? And we say, this is a high priority because, or this is a low priority because as well. So all I think just highlighting very important skills that are necessary in a modern AppSec environment, well beyond just the technical skills of reverse engineering, which, speaking of technical skills of reverse engineering, can still be pretty entertaining, especially when they're accompanied by some pretty good communication skills and nice write-ups. So we've got here someone who went through did a binary diff on the latest iOS patch 15.02 and did a great walkthrough to say, well, what got patched? Let's see what, based on what was patched, let's, reverse engineer that. Look for what the problem was. We found that there was a size calculation that has an integer overflow in it. And that seems like a classic case for setting up vulnerabilities, setting up exploits, especially if you can influence the lengths of what's being calculated upon. And lo and behold, the researcher walks through a lot of their thought process about how they reverse engineered, how they thought about how can we identify what registers we control, what addresses we can influence, et cetera. And I just thought it was really neat to be able to look at this. If you are an iOS, you enjoy iOS, and iOS hacking is probably going to be really informative for you. But even if you aren't that iOS expert, it's still a good way of just learning how do other people think? How do you think from an attacker-minded mindset, to keep reusing the word mind there. But I think that's just kind of helpful of learn and emulate what others do. And this doesn't have to be applied, this thought process doesn't have to be applied just to iOS. And that's where I'm trying to go with that. So, John, not sure if there are other aspects of this that really kind of stood out to you or made you particularly interested in this article.
Yeah, we haven't seen any. I've always been a really big fan of when someone does a bin patch or a diff on a patch and actually reverses it and figures out what was patched. I've never had the time to do that. There's a few other things on my when I'm free list that I want to do, but after I get all those done, I'd love to go and give this stuff a try some point. To me, it's super interesting. What's cool about this one is you sort of mentioned there, usually when I've seen it, I think, usually when I see this type of stuff, there's a lot more of the decompiled language that they bring it back up to, not so much looking at it at the machine code or the registers or stack. And so I think that's interesting here, that is the thought process that he's showing is on that machine code, on the assembly, because usually when you decompile that and bring it back up, you're now in the realm of whatever that decompiler was designed to, recognize this string of bytes and say, oh, that's a for loop. This is what it looks like. So it's nice seeing him doing it at the machine level. I've got to get on the soapbox for a tiny second. We've talked a few times about Apple, and by the way, anyone listening to us live right now, thank you. I really appreciate it, because Apple started about 30 minutes ago doing their keynote, and that's hard to compete against. But we've talked a few times this year over Apple and what they're doing around responsible disclosure and how they're getting back to people, and it seemed like it was sort of slow. So an article came out last week showing that they're actually telling some of their researchers to not publish things after they found them, and they'd be like, "Oh, we'll give you credit next month. We'll give you credit next month," and it's looking like they're in some cases not giving credit. So, I've been on here and on Paul Security Weekly saying that, hey, it's Apple is doing. They've got a reason for it, but it sounds like they are just trying to keep some of this stuff quiet so they don't have as much negative PR about their security. So that's sort of on my ranting list for the next week or two. I'm trying to get people to think about that and hopefully get some attention from Apple about it and maybe get them to reconsider how they're doing this stuff. So there's my security politics for the week. But this is a good write-up to get back on our topic, and hopefully people, if they have some time, they should take a peek and sort of see how that mind works, because it is pretty interesting.
Take a peek, and it does one other small asterisk too. The researcher relied on Corellium as part of this, so it's just also pointing out that the benefits of having emulated environments and that can make security research like this more effective, more efficient, and that's what we like to see. We want to see more people finding consequential bugs, vulns, reporting them, and seeing those fixed, because it helps the entire ecosystem. Other types of vulns we've seen in coordinated disclosure this week, since that's our bingo word of this episode, just kind of this bit simpler one on GitHub Actions, and a researcher who found out how they could bypass reviews, taking advantage of GitHub Actions. Now, what was interesting to me was that you didn't have to be actually explicitly using the GitHub Actions capability within GitHub service to be vulnerable to this. It could have been applied against you, but you did need to have, I believe, the actor here, the threat actor here, still needs to have right permissions. So I just want to kind of approach this from that threat modeling perspective of the previous vuln we were just talking about in iOS. Pretty nasty. Hopefully you've updated your iPhones to fix that flaw and to address it. And this one, GitHub Actions, yes, you do need to be worried about it, but it's not necessarily quite as gnarly if it's, you're already within a trusted user base, so to speak, if someone needs write access to your repo. But keep in mind, even with that, I will throw the caveat in there, is that compromised credentials are one of the best ways into source code, into creating into an organization, creating a backdoor, sending commits. So in this scenario where you either do have a malicious insider or compromised credentials, this would be one of those nice subtle ways of potentially getting backdoored code or a subtle flaw into a code base. So definitely not going to dismiss it, but just try to put it into some perspective of how it might be exploited and how that might unfold into what you've done around your CI/CD pipeline, as well as if you've deployed FIDO keys yet to protect your users or protect your developer stations.
Yeah, the tricky bit around this one was if you're able to use this to bypass rules for either pull request reviews or those CI actions, and able to use this to push code into either a trunk or a develop branch without going through review. That's when you have sort of an insider attacker scenario here, and it sounds like that could happen, but still at the same time not really fully clear. But either way, it sounds like this has been taken care of by GitHub, if I remember right. It's an interesting one, just from that point of view of when we set up permissions and things like this in GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket or what have you, that thing which we're using in a CI process, what type of access does it have, or either what can it do to our source code, or once it has its hands on our source code, could it copy it somewhere else? Could it publish it? What else could it do with it? So I think we were talking earlier this year, and then I think the conversation quieted down because everyone's thinking about supply chain. But really, the security around these tools, which we use in an automated manner to prove the security or to ensure the security of our application, or even just the automation of deployment, those things themselves have a pretty wide access to both our source code as well as to our infrastructure. So a lot of thought needs to go into what we're putting in there, how we're using it, what type of access it has, and all those sort of things around it. So yeah, it's good to look at this, I think, from that point of view. Not so much, oh my God, I need to go and secure things right now. But, they've got a video on there. Hell, I'll even click on it. It's 90 seconds, 2 minutes. Go watch it. Think about how they're doing things, and then how does that affect your environment? And you don't even have to be in the cloud, right? If they don't say it in here, but if you're running enterprise GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket or any of those things. Hopefully I'm not using trigger words with people. I know some of those products on site can be a little more difficult, not naming names. But even if you're doing this on site, right, you're thinking, hey, I'm not using the cloud, all my code here local, I don't have anything to worry about. We've got it behind a DMZR internally, and all of a sudden there's a bug like this in there. Okay, does that again change your? Were you depending too much on that edge firewall, boundary firewall to keep you safe? What happens with a tool with an issue like this, a vulnerability like this in that case? So again, it's definitely worth thinking about, probably more than once a year.
No, great point. Yeah, if you haven't done a threat modeling exercise around the attack surface of who has access, or both people and system services that can touch, has touch points within the CI/CD pipeline, this is the type of article that might be a good reminder to do so. And John has some good points, so maybe hit him up in Discord and see what his consulting rate is for helping you walk through that beyond what we can cover here in this episode. Because I also want to, in this episode, switch to a different type of attacker. These are, and I'm going to set this up a little bit because one of the things I like to try and pull out when we talk about different vulnerabilities is not just focus purely on the technical aspects. The iOS one we just covered just now, pretty fun, pretty cool. Obviously, any directory traversal out there is going to get on my radar. But a couple weeks ago, we've talked about vulnerabilities in dating apps. In I think it was Bumble that can expose user location. We've hit some other vulnerabilities that have more individual consequences or go into that type of trust and safety. Basically, the idea that application security does have impacts just beyond a checklist of the OWASP top 10 and so on. In this case, we're looking at have an article about cheating in games. In this case, Call of Duty Ricochet. Where I'm going with this is the idea that in Warzone, getting my words mixed up here. So in Warzone, in gaming in general, cheaters are bad for both business, obviously, but as well as the joy of the players playing the game. And obviously, you as a game developer would want to have players having fun, enjoying themselves on an even battlefield, so to speak, based on their skill, perhaps a bit of luck, but not based on them running cheat bots, things like aim bots, things like other areas where they have different ways of seeing where all of the other players are. So a long preface to basically highlight some articles on a different type of application security around anti-cheating. And just thought this was kind of an interesting way to think of different types of threat models, because we've had anti-cheating examples not only here in Warzone specifically, all the way back through other types of point-and-shoot games, all the way into location spoofing in games like Pokemon or other types like that. So that was sort of the broad umbrella that I wanted to pull under here. And hopefully at least some of that rambling makes sense. I'm not sure. I'm just going to go put myself on pause for a moment. Let's see what John can do taking over here.
It's funny because the last, so I don't do video games because if I do that, you won't see me on ASW or anywhere else for weeks. But back in my earlier days, cheating then was binary patching and stuff like that to get around some issues in copy protection and things like that. But it feels weird, and I think we're going to get some expert commentary here in a minute. But it feels weird to me from the point of view of they did a lot of rah-rah around publicizing this, but it sounds like the folks that are actually using it are like it wasn't that hard to bypass. So I'm not sure if that's they didn't realize I can't imagine they didn't realize they built a better system. So it sounds like, as Vice is saying here in this article, that it was more sort of a way to grab a bit of attention in the headlines for a little bit. And it's interesting. I think it's sort of a religious thing, right? It falls into one or two groups. Either you're very into wanting to play the game, not just to cheat and win, but to use some of those cheat tools to make the experience more fun for you, versus the guy who's like, I want to go from level 1 to level 100 without any cheats, any aids, and go do it first at easy level, then medium level, and come back and do it at hard level and go keep playing. Different types of people. But It's so from that point of view, to me, it's interesting to see how people would or would not want to use this. But yeah, I'm starting to ramble now myself, so maybe we should ask someone else.
Yeah, exactly. I think the only other thing, as I remember too, the other point I wanted to make about this is that the AppSec angle here, the approach is also not just, doing input validation, doing output encoding, a lot of, do we have ASLR turned on in our compiled code, things like that, memory management. A lot of it is how we're protecting, call it the business logic of this application, and defenses against how can we detect fraud, which has parallels perhaps in the payments industry. How do you detect someone that is using bot behavior versus this is that the term of art is often that authentic versus unauthentic behavior. And interesting area. Should be at least some part of your threat models out there, but I'm not sure how much they are. That does bring us to two other articles that don't necessarily fit fully into a theme. And I think maybe we'll just grab the one on NIST real quick that I wanted to highlight because it was a more draft NIST guidance about DevSecOps, and essentially, I think like microservices, but I think what they're really talking about is containerized environments. And the reason I highlighted it is that the NIST is looking for feedback from the public. How good do these guidelines look? Is there something that you'd like to see add there? And I know a lot of our listeners may have good opinions or may be very opinionated on these topics from DevSecOps to containers. So they may want to take a look and at least go through the table of contents, see if there's something that stands out for you, and go see what might be improved or what looks good in there.
This one feels... I want to say refreshingly different, so I'm going to stick with that phrase and charge forward. From the point of view of it seems like they're taking a little more holistic view of it. And I can't remember if you worked with Nicholas when he was over at Qualys. I've had fleeting passes with him. Nicholas Chalane was head of the DevSecOps sort of stuff going on at the American Department of Defense, U.S. Department of Defense until recently. So a lot of this doc has his hands on it. And if you're familiar with his work, what he's been working on the last few years, and you look through this, you're like, yeah, Defense One, a lot of their sort of the DevSecOps stuff that the government's been doing, it's got his handprint all over it, which is pretty cool to see. But so what's interesting about it, besides so where I formed that opinion that I came in with, if you just look at what page 4, the abstract and the intro to this, and the way he's talking about, the way they're sort of setting up, I think it's the abstract and the intro. And this is out for review, folks. So review it, give feedback. They love that type of thing. But if you look through some of the initial stuff of that abstract, the intro, and some of the beginning bits, how they're putting that story together of, what is DevSecOps in their eye? Why are they doing this? What do they think? It's almost more, as you're hearing us talk about this, we're talking about this as a DevSecOps paper. But if you look at the title, this is supposed to be about service mesh. And I think that's what's sort of interesting about this to me is they're building an overall story. We've written, I was writing a NIST doc in the previous life. It ended up being a Cloud Security Alliance doc or a secure microservices, application microservices papers. So this stuff has been covered multiple times, but still here they're doing it in obviously a little more, it's NIST, so it's going to be government focused. They're really leaning on the work from DoD, like I said, so Platform One, Iron Bank, DoD Enterprise, DevSecOps. That's really a core of what this paper is talking about. But those guys have done a really amazing job. I mean, they've got Kubernetes running in fighter planes and stuff, like all sorts of craziness going on, but they're doing it in a secure way that is very well done. I think we've talked about them in the past, but that's sort of somehow telegraphed into this paper, to use that sort of management phrase. And it's an interesting read, I think, from that point of view. It's 40 pages long. Again, these things tend to get long and dry. But I think it if you haven't read something like this for a while, it's worth sort of a scan to go back through and think about, what are these things? Why are we doing them? Why do we need these different pieces? What's the end goal? We're not just, using Kubernetes because, that's what everyone else is doing. We're not just, I still haven't touched service meshes in full disclosure. I'm leaving that thing until I really need it. And this is from someone who's been doing, containers in Kubernetes for years now, and I'm still trying to avoid service meshes. So use these things when you need to, but this paper puts through sort of an overall, this is how we've taken all those pieces and put them together to give what we feel is a holistic, secure solution, which I think is really cool.
Oh, very cool. And it definitely is at the high level where it's setting up. This is how you might consider the components of a program to make sure, and to me, the points that stood out, the idea of the automation behind the move towards infrastructure as code, policy as code, and observability as code, just so we can express what we want to do from security controls, security principles in code that can be then executed in an automated fashion, as well as linted, inspected in an automated in fashion as well. So it's what's really nice. Definitely not a checklist. Definitely high level. Has the meatiness of a government document, as I think you sort of were alluding to there, John. But still quite informative, and could be more so if you if any of our listeners have some feedback for it. I think that's going to probably wrap us up for the time that we have. So we can't get into service mesh and got to go play some computer games of our own. I've been diving into Hades on the Switch and coming up with a lot of creative curse words as I fail to pass that game. So while I avoid getting us banned from YouTube for all the language I've been using while I'm playing Hades, what kind of parting words would you like to share for today, John?
Yeah, my cursing and swearing really comes down to when I'm doing software development nowadays. We're working on probably a series of blog posts around how to get AWS Cognito running and how that should be used by a startup. So maybe we'll talk about that in a future episode. That was a cause of a lot of cursing for us. But otherwise, yeah, it's we're middle of October. We're starting to draw down the year. The virtual conferences are coming to an end. Actually, one call out, meant to mention this at the top, I forgot. Ladies, women, we want to get more men's input on this. We've got two guys in the podcast. Anyone wants to reach out to me in any of the standard ways, the Twitter, the Discord, anything. This isn't a marketing thing. We just want to make sure that we're providing a voice for men, women, transgender, people of any different color, shape, or size, are a preference in the world. If there's something you think we're missing or that we should be covering or you'd like to see on here, reach out to us. We want to make sure that we're sort of representing the whole community. So that's it. And I hope everyone's doing well.
Nothing to add there. I think that's great. Just let us know. We want to make sure we represent as much of the community as we can, all of the community. Great point there, John. Thank you. And on that very serious note, I'm not going to joke around that. I want to thank John for joining us. Thank all of you for listening, and we will return next week on Application Security Weekly.